You know, in the grand story of history, some of the biggest battles aren't fought with guns or armies. They're fought with ink. This is a story about a man whose only weapon was his pen, and how his books became a serious, existential threat to an entire military dictatorship.
And that's the big question, right? How on earth does a collection of articles, of essays, become more dangerous than a protest, more threatening than a rebellion? Well, to get it, we have to travel back to a time and a place where controlling what people knew meant everything.
So let's set the scene. We're in South Korea during the 70s and 80s under heavy military rule. This was a society under just immense pressure. The government was demanding absolute, unquestioning loyalty. Dissent? Not a chance. But even in places like that, new ideas always find a way to bubble up to the surface. And the front line for this ideological war was the university campus. The government was absolutely terrified of something they called consciousness raising. That was their term for students getting exposed to pro-democracy, anti-authoritarian ideas that could turn a student into an activist. And what was at the heart of this transformation? Books. And here's the almost funny part. The government itself confirmed its own worst fear. They ran these internal security surveys, trying to figure out what was radicalizing the youth. And guess what? One book kept showing up at the very top of the list. Ri Yong-hee's Logic of a Transition Era. It wasn't just influential, it was the single most powerful tool for opening students' minds. So of course you have to ask, who was this guy, Ri Yong-hee? I mean, what made his writing so powerful that a government with tanks, spies, and total control of the media saw him as a major threat? Well, Ri was no armchair academic, that's for sure. He was actually born in what is now North Korea and served for 7 long years as an army officer during the brutal Korean War. And it was there, in the military, that he saw it all. The corruption, the injustice, how the sons of poor families were basically treated as cannon fodder while the rich kids always found a way out. That experience lit a fire in him. He decided to become a journalist to expose the rot he'd seen from the inside. And this is the secret to his power. It wasn't just passionate writing. Ri's work was built on a foundation of relentless, painstaking research. He said himself that he spent about 70% of his time just gathering data and primary sources. A lot of them were official U.S. documents and international reports that completely contradicted what his own government was saying. It made his arguments just about impossible to dismiss. They were built on cold, hard facts. So, armed with this arsenal of facts, Ri started to systematically take apart the foundational myths that the dictatorship used to justify its own power. He went after the very stories they told themselves and their people. Let's take the Vietnam War, for example. The official story from the government was that South Korea was bravely helping an ally defend freedom, but Rio, using sources like the Pentagon Papers, showed the devastating truth. The war was kicked off by a fabricated event in the Gulf of Tonkin, and that South Korean troops were, in effect, acting as mercenaries for the United States. For a lot of people, this was just an earth-shattering revelation. Then you had the myth of military weakness. The government was constantly saying that without the U.S. military, the country would be immediately overrun by the North. But in 1988, Ri published this incredibly detailed analysis showing that actually, by then, South Korea's own military was more than strong enough to defend itself. His paper was so powerful that the Ministry of Defense actually had to start publishing an annual defense white paper just to try and argue against his points. He even challenged the government's very reason for being. The state claimed it was the only legitimate government for the entire Korean peninsula. Ri just calmly pointed to the actual UN resolution from history, which stated that its legitimacy was only recognized for the area where elections could be properly observed, which was the South. It sounds subtle, but it was a profound crack in the state's founding myth. Now, as you can imagine, you don't go around shattering a regime's favorite stories without them noticing. And the government didn't just write angry editorials in response. They tried to break him. For doing his job as a journalist, Riza paid a huge price. He was fired from one newspaper job after another, kicked out of his professorship at a university, arrested 5 different times, and spent a total of 3 years in prison. All the while, he and his family were living under constant government surveillance. His entire life became a testament to the real cost of speaking truth to power. But you know, the most telling story, the one that really captures what he was up against, didn't happen at a protest or in a newspaper column. It happened in an interrogation room. So he's in this room, and the prosecutor starts in on him, trying to belittle him, He's sneering at Ri's education, saying things like, "You're a dropout from a maritime school? How dare you critique society?" He's trying to paint him as some unqualified nobody. Then the prosecutor starts going through the books they confiscated from Ray's house. He picks up a copy of Das Kapital, the foundational text of communism, and with a completely straight face, he asks, "Who wrote this?" Just let that sink in for a second. The government's top prosecutor, the guy in charge of finding and locking up so-called communists, had no idea who Karl Marx was. That single moment revealed everything. Ri wasn't just fighting a brutal regime. He was fighting an ignorant one. Ri Young-hui passed away in 2010, and he left behind this legacy that's, well, it's celebrated, but it's also complex. He wasn't some simple hero or a one-sided ideologue. He was famous for using this analogy right here. For him, the whole point wasn't for one side to win. The goal was to build a society that could actually fly forward, balanced and stable. He was just as critical of extremism on the left as he was of the authoritarianism he saw on the right. And look, he wasn't without his critics. He was praised for his courage, for sure, but some people accused him of having a bit of a heroism complex. Even his own son described him as a pretty stern and demanding father. And others pointed out that in his relentless focus on the government's failures, he sometimes overlooked its real successes, like the country's incredible reforestation project. But in the end, if you had to boil down who Ri Young-hui was, it comes down to this. He was a truth seeker. His loyalty wasn't to a political party or a flag or any kind of ism. It was to the verifiable fact. His whole life was this incredible demonstration of what it means to chase down the truth, especially when it's dangerous and deeply inconvenient for everyone. And that really brings us right back to today, doesn't it? His struggle against state-sponsored propaganda feels so familiar in our own world of fake news and algorithm-fueled outrage. It leaves us with a really vital question to chew on. In an age where we are just drowning in easy lies, what are we willing to risk for a hard, inconvenient truth?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on our comfortable lives and really look at the unseen price that someone somewhere is always paying.
So, let's just dive right in. I mean, we all love our modern comforts, right? But have you ever really stopped to think about it? What are the hidden sacrifices, the unseen costs that make all of this possible?
To get our heads around this, we're going to start with the really powerful ideas of literary critic Kim Jong-chol. He basically forces us to confront the true price of the energy that powers our entire world. Now, Kim Jong-chol brings up this super provocative proposal from an anti-nuclear activist. But it's not a literal suggestion, of course. It's a challenge, right? It's designed to expose a really simple, uncomfortable truth. We only really understand risk when we're the ones who might have to pay the price. And here, you can see two completely opposite ends of the human spectrum. On one side, you have Jesus, who is described in the original Greek as feeling splachnosomai for other people's suffering. And that's not just feeling sad. It's a deep physical pain, like your own intestines are being torn apart. And on the other extreme, you have President Truman. After ordering the use of the atomic bomb, he reportedly slept soundly. It's a staggering contrast from total gut-wrenching empathy to a complete and utter detachment.
And Kim argues that this disconnect is the absolute core of the problem. See, the people who benefit from power, whether that's cheap electricity from a power plant miles away or a strategic military advantage, they're almost always insulated, shielded from the terrible consequences. And those consequences, they get forced onto the vulnerable, the voiceless, the people who live far, far away from the centers of power.
You know, this idea of a hidden sacrifice isn't just about these huge abstract things like energy policy. It actually extends to the most fundamental part of our lives, the food right there on our plates.
In Korean Buddhist temples, a meal is called gongyang. Now, this isn't just another word for food. Its root meaning is an offering that is built on the sacrifice of other lives. This way of thinking completely reframes a simple meal. It becomes this profound act of acknowledging the sacrifice of the plant, the farmer, the sun, the rain, the whole ecosystem that brought this food to you.
And this idea is so deep in the culture, it actually shows up in slang. In Korean, if you say, "You are my bop," which means "you are my meal," it is not a compliment. It means complete dominance. It means one person is basically being consumed or sacrificed for another's gain. So even our language unconsciously gets it. For one thing to live, another is very often consumed.
And this leads us to an even deeper, and honestly, a more painful truth. It's something the author Sung-Suk Jung explores through something we usually think of as pretty romantic. So Sung-Suk Jae tells this story about a mythical delicacy. It's called seokwajet, a special kind of pickled oyster. But just look at the conditions you need to get it. It's not the product of a great harvest. No, it only appears when a family on an island, already hit by a poor harvest, is pushed to the absolute brink of desperation by the first snow of winter. This food, this delicacy, it only exists because someone else has no other choice but to sell their very last bit of food.
The symbolism here gets even heavier. Sung points out that for people in the know, the first snow isn't just for taking pretty pictures. It's the best time to buy up cheap land. And why is that? Because for farmers, that beautiful first snow means a hard, brutal winter's coming. It's when the debt collectors show up, and they're often forced to sell the land their family has owned for generations at a massive loss, all just to survive.
And there it is, the very same event, the first snow. For some of us, it represents romance and beauty. But for the vulnerable, it is a cold, brutal symbol of their fight for survival. It's just another unseen price, paid by someone else, for the comfort and even for the poetic moments in our own lives.
Okay, so we've uncovered these hidden prices of power, of our food, even of beauty. But this brings us to one final, really difficult question. What is the price of just knowing all of this?
I mean, that's a shocking statement, isn't it? It comes from the famous Korean scholar E.O. Ryong. After a whole life dedicated to learning and books, he says he can't, in good conscience, tell other people to read. Why on earth would he say something like that?
Well, his point is this tragic paradox. He argues that in our society, it's often the barbaric, the unthinking, the people who act without the weight of deep reflection who get ahead. Reading gives you empathy. It forces you to become painfully aware of all the world's unseen truths. And in a world that so often rewards ruthless pragmatism, encouraging someone to read, to feel, to understand, can actually feel like a cruel act. Like you're just burdening them with a painful awareness they might have been happier without.
And that just leaves us with this final, nagging question. Once you've seen the hidden costs holding up our world, well, you can't unsee them. So in a world that is built on these unseen sacrifices, is this awareness a heavy, paralyzing burden? Or is it a fundamental duty that we all have to carry?